My brother made me best man, then replaced me a week before his wedding. I still showed up. They sat me at a table in the corner with people I'd never met. I watched his friend give the speech I was supposed to give. I left before the cake. He texted me 3 words the next morning. My name's Harrison. I'm 32, and I need to tell you about the worst wedding I've ever attended. That's saying a lot, considering I once went to a ceremony where the groom's ex showed up wearing a white dress, and the flower girl bit the officiant. But at least at that wedding, I had a seat at a table where somebody actually knew my name. Let me back up. My brother Cole is 3 years younger than me. Growing up, we were close. Not in the made-for-TV, tossing a football in the backyard kind of way, but close in the ways that actually mattered. I was the one who taught him how to ride a bike. I sat outside the principal's office with him after he's got suspended in 8th grade for telling his history teacher that the Civil War was basically just one really long HOA dispute. I was also the one who drove 45 minutes at 2 in the morning to pick him up from a party when he was 16, because he was too scared to call our parents. We had good parents, don't get me wrong. Mom and Dad were solid. But there was always this quiet, unspoken dynamic in our house. Cole was the golden child and I was, the bronze child. I wasn't neglected, just a little less shiny. Cole was the kid who got straight A's without even trying, made varsity baseball as a sophomore, and had the kind of effortless charisma that made teachers, neighbors and even random strangers at the grocery store naturally gravitate toward him. I was more of an acquired taste, quiet, a little awkward, good at math, which as we all know, is the personality trait that gets you invited to exactly 0 parties. But I never resented Cole for any of it. That's the part people don't understand. I loved my brother. I was proud of him. When he graduated from college, I drove 6 hours just to be there. When he landed his first big promotion at a marketing firm downtown, I took him out to dinner and paid for the whole meal, even though I was barely scraping by myself. Then he told me he was dating a woman named Sutton. I was genuinely happy for him. She seemed wonderful, smart, funny, worked in nonprofit fundraising, and had this laugh that could fill an entire room. I remember thinking, good for him. He found his person. They dated for about 2 years before Cole proposed. He called me the night it happened, and I swear his voice was shaking. Harrison, he said. She said yes, man. She said yes. I congratulated him, and I meant every single word. Then he said the sentence that, looking back, was the beginning of the end. I want you to be my best man. There's nobody else I'd even consider. I'm not going to lie. I got a little choked up. At that point, we were 29 and 32, and life had done what life always does. We didn't spend as much time together anymore. He had his world. I had mine. But hearing him say that made it feel like we were kids again, like none of the distance between us had ever mattered. I said yes immediately. I didn't hesitate for even a second. For the next 8 months, I threw myself into the role completely. I helped him choose the venue, a gorgeous converted barn about an hour outside the city. I organized the bachelor party, which involved renting a cabin by a lake, and somehow convincing 8 guys with wildly different levels of outdoor experience to go kayaking. It went about as well as you'd expect. I also started working on my speech in the 2nd month. I know that sounds early, but here's the thing about me. I'm not naturally comfortable speaking in public. I'm the kind of guy who rehearses ordering coffee in his head before reaching the register. So I knew this speech had to be perfect, and the only way it was ever going to be perfect was if I started early and rewrote it about 47 times. I treated that speech like it was my thesis. I dug through old photographs. I called childhood friends to collect stories. I even reached out to one of Cole's college roommates, a guy named Fletcher, hoping to get a few good anecdotes from the years when I wasn't around. The speech was funny, it was heartfelt. It included a callback to an inside joke Cole and I shared about a raccoon that broke into our garage when we were kids. It was, and I say this with complete confidence, the best thing I'd ever written. And I'd written plenty of mediocre things. That's when things slowly started to change. About 3 months before the wedding, Cole began spending more time with a coworker named Prescott. I'd met Prescott once at a barbecue, and my impression was that he was the type of guy who called everyone bro, and genuinely believed being loud counted as a personality. But Cole liked him, and who was I to judge? Back in college, I had a friend whose favorite hobby was ranking gas stations by the cleanliness of their bathrooms, so I wasn't exactly in a position to question anyone else's friendships. At first, the changes were subtle. Cole started mentioning Prescott more often. Prescott and I went golfing. Prescott knows this amazing steakhouse. Prescott thinks the venue should have a cigar bar. That last comment bothered me a little, because we'd already finalized the plans for the venue, but I let it slide. Then the wedding texts started coming less and less frequently. Decisions were being made without me. The seating chart, the playlist, even the groomsmen's ties. I'd only hear about the changes after they were already made, usually through the group chat Prescott had been added to, without anyone even asking me. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it. Cole was stressed. Weddings are chaotic. Maybe Prescott was just trying to help. I was still the best man, my name was still printed on the program. That's what mattered. Then, exactly 8 days before the wedding, Cole called me. It wasn't a long conversation. He didn't ease into it, he just said it, almost like he was reading from a card, which, knowing Cole, he probably was. "Hey Harrison. So, Sutton and I have been talking, and we've decided to make some changes to the wedding party. We're going to have Prescott step into the best man role. It's nothing personal. He's just been more involved lately, and Sutton thinks it'll flow better for the ceremony." I didn't say anything for about 10 seconds. I know because I spent the entire time staring at the clock on my microwave. "Harrison, you there?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm here, you're still a groomsman. Obviously nothing else changes. We just think this makes more sense." I wanted to ask him what part of replacing your own brother as best man, 8 days before the wedding made more sense. I wanted to ask if Prescott had written a speech that included the raccoon in the garage. I wanted to ask whether Sutton, who I'd done nothing but treat kindly for the past 2 years, had actually said that, or if Cole was hiding behind her name, because he didn't have the courage to own the decision himself, but I didn't ask any of it. Because I'm Harrison, and Harrison doesn't make scenes. Harrison says okay, then he hangs up and sits alone in his apartment, staring at a wall for 45 minutes, wondering what he did wrong. So that's exactly what I did. The week between that phone call and the wedding was one of the longest weeks of my life. I replayed the conversation over and over, searching for some clue. Had I missed something? Had I done something wrong during the bachelor party? Was there a moment when Cole looked at me and thought, "You know what? This guy isn't up to it"? I went back through our text history like a detective reviewing case files. Everything looked completely normal, until suddenly it wasn't. The next day, I called my mom not to complain, just to see if she knew. She did, and somehow, that hurt the most. She already knew. "Oh sweetie. Cole mentioned it," she said, as casually as if he'd told her they were changing caterers. "I think Prescott's just been such a big help with everything. It's nothing against you." "It's nothing against me," I repeated. I could hear how flat my own voice sounded. "Don't make this into a thing, Harrison. It's Cole's wedding. Let him have it the way he wants." And there it was, the family motto, printed on the invisible crest that had been hanging over our house my entire life. Let Cole have it the way he wants. Let Cole choose the restaurant. Let Cole have the bigger bedroom. Let Cole take credit for the thing you helped him build. Don't make it a thing, Harrison, don't be difficult. I wasn't going to make it a thing. I showed up to the rehearsal dinner 2 nights before the wedding wearing a suit I'd bought specifically for the occasion. I shook hands. I smiled. I told Sutton she looked beautiful, because she did. I even shook Prescott's hand, and when he said, "No hard feelings, right bro?" I replied, "Of course not." Which is the most heroic lie I've ever told, and I've told my dentist I floss every day. The rehearsal dinner was held at an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, 1 long table, candles, wine flowing freely. I was seated about halfway down, between my Aunt Glenda, who spent most of the evening describing her knee surgery in graphic medical detail, and Sutton's cousin Rowan, who seemed perfectly nice, but clearly had no idea who I was, or why I looked like I was attending my own funeral. Cole stood up to give a short toast. He thanked everyone for coming. He thanked our parents. He thanked Sutton's parents. He thanked every member of the bridal party by name. Then he thanked Prescott specifically. "This guy has been my rock through this whole process," he said, raising his glass toward Prescott. "Couldn't have done it without you, man." He didn't mention me. Not once, not even in passing. I was his brother, his former best man, and somehow, I'd become part of the furniture. I sat there with my fork frozen halfway to my mouth and realized something I'd been avoiding for a long time. This wasn't really about the wedding, it was about everything. Every time I'd quietly been pushed to the side so Cole could have his moment. Every time I'd bitten my tongue. Every time I'd convinced myself it didn't matter, because that's just how families worked. It all mattered, it had always mattered, I'd just been too loyal. or maybe too afraid to admit it. The wedding day arrived. And I showed up, because I said I would. I'm a lot of things, but I'm not a flake. I put on my groomsman's suit, which was slightly different from the best man's suit, because of course it was. Then I drove to the barn venue with my stomach tied in knots, and a speech I'd never get to give folded neatly inside my jacket pocket. I don't even know why I brought it, probably sentimental stupidity. The ceremony was beautiful. I'll give them that. The barn looked incredible, covered in string lights, wildflowers, and that warm amber glow that makes everything feel like a scene from a movie. Sutton walked down the aisle. Cole started crying. And for about 30 seconds, I forgot I was angry. I was just happy for my little brother. Then the feeling faded, and I went back to standing in line like a very well-dressed mannequin. After the ceremony, everyone moved into the reception area. That's when things became truly, spectacularly insulting. I wasn't seated with the wedding party. I wasn't seated with my family. I wasn't even seated anywhere near the front. I was assigned to table 14, tucked away in the far corner of the reception hall, partially hidden behind a support column right next to the kitchen door. The people at my table were Sutton's coworker's boyfriend, an elderly couple I'd never met who turned out to be the caterer's parents, and a woman named Deline, who was apparently Sutton's college roommate's mother's neighbor. I'm not making that up. I sat down and looked at my place card. Not Harrison, brother of the groom. Just Harrison. Like I was some random acquaintance they'd invited to fill out the head count. The reception unfolded the way receptions always do. Dinner, dancing, toasts. Then came the moment I'd been dreading. Prescott stood up, tapped his glass, and began giving the best man speech. My replacement best man speech. It was fine jarkrick. He told a story about Cole at work, involving a printer jam and a missed deadline. Which is exactly the kind of story that reminds you, the guy has only known the groom for about 14 months. He made a joke about marriage being like a group project where you actually like your partner. People laughed politely. Sutton smiled. Cole grinned and clapped Prescott on the shoulder. Meanwhile, I sat at table 14 behind the support column, listening to a speech that had none of the history, none of the heart, and none of the raccoon in the garage. And I felt something inside me crack. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a quiet fracture, like a tree branch giving way beneath the weight of fresh snow. After the speech, my mom came over. For a moment, I thought maybe she was checking on me. Maybe she'd seen my face during Prescott's toast and realized things had gone too far. Instead, she smiled and said, "Wasn't that a lovely speech? Prescott's such a natural." I looked at her and said, "Yeah, he's great." She gave my arm a gentle pat and walked away. I lasted about another hour. I watched people dance. I watched Cole and Sutton share their first dance to a song I didn't recognize. I watched Prescott lead a toast with the groomsmen. A toast I was technically part of, but nobody bothered to come get me for. I watched my dad tell a group of guests the same story he'd told 100 times about Cole's baseball days, and I noticed, once again, that he never mentioned I was the one who drove Cole to every single practice that season, because Dad was always working late. At 9:45, before they cut the cake, I stood up from table 14, placed my napkin on my chair, and walked out. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't make a scene. I simply left. I walked through the kitchen door since it was right there, past two confused servers, and stepped into the parking lot. The air was cool. It smelled like pine trees. I sat in my car for a while. Then I pulled the speech from my jacket pocket and read it one last time under the dome light. It was good. It was really good. And nobody was ever going to hear it. I drove home, hung up my suit, and sat alone on my couch in the dark. The next morning, at 7:14, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Cole, 3 words. "You left early." Not, "Where did you go?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry." Just, "You left early." A simple statement, an observation. Like I'd slipped out of a work meeting early and he was taking attendance. I stared at those 3 words for a long time. Then I set my phone down, and I didn't reply. The weeks after the wedding were hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I didn't fall apart in some dramatic made-for-television way. I just dimmed like someone had turned the brightness on my entire life down by about 40%. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner standing over the kitchen counter, because sitting at the table somehow felt like too much of a commitment to the evening. I stopped calling my parents. Not out of spite, at least, not consciously. I just didn't have the energy anymore to keep playing the role of the easygoing son who never lets anything bother him. I'd been playing that role for 32 years, and my contract had finally expired. Cole texted me a few more times over the 2 weeks after the wedding. Hope you're doing good. Mom says you haven't called, and my personal favorite, Sutton wants to do a family dinner soon. You in? As if everything was perfectly normal. As if I hadn't been pushed into the background at his own wedding and walked out before they even served dessert. The level of obliviousness would have been impressive if it hadn't hurt so much. I didn't reply to any of the messages. Not because I was trying to play some strategic game of silence. I honestly had no idea what to say. What was I supposed to text back? Hey, thanks for replacing me as best man, seating me behind a pillar with the caterer's parents, and then messaging me like I'm some casual acquaintance you ran into at the gym. The English language simply doesn't have enough words for that level of disappointment. And I say that as someone who scored in the 98th percentile on the verbal section of the SAT, which for the record, has never once been useful in real life. About a month after the wedding, my friend Ara called me. We'd been friends since freshman year of college. She's the kind of person who'll tell you your haircut looks terrible and then drive you to the barber herself. Zero tolerance for nonsense. But one of the biggest hearts you'll ever find. She knew something was wrong the moment I answered. You sound like a deflated balloon, she said. What happened? Not what happened. With a question mark, just what happened. Like she already knew there was a story, and all she was doing was opening the door, so I told her everything. The best man demotion, the rehearsal dinner, table 14, the speech I never gave, the 3-word text, all of it. When I finished, there was a long silence, then she said, Harrison, I love you. But you've got to stop letting people treat you like a side character in your own life. That hit me harder than I expected. I'm coming over Saturday, she said. We're going to eat something that isn't microwave burritos. And you're going to tell me what you actually want to do about this. She showed up that Saturday, carrying Thai food and a level of directness that probably should have been classified as a weapon. We sat on the floor of my living room because I still hadn't replaced the dining chairs I'd broken during a spectacularly bad attempt at assembling furniture. She looked at me and laid it out plainly. You've got 2 options, she said, pointing a spring roll at me like a tiny edible sword. Option 1. You keep being the nice guy who absorbs everything and slowly grows resentful until you're 65 and bitter. Option 2. You start building a life that doesn't revolve around waiting for your family to notice you. I chose option 2, not because I had some life-changing epiphany with inspiring music playing in the background. Simply because option 1 sounded absolutely miserable. And I was already halfway there. The rebuilding started with small steps. I threw myself into my job. I was a data analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm, which sounds boring because honestly, it is. But I was good at it, really good. For years I'd been coasting, doing solid work without ever pushing myself, because I'd convinced myself I was the background character, reliable, steady, unremarkable. Ara's words kept replaying in my head, side character. I didn't want to be a side character anymore. I started volunteering for bigger projects. I stayed late at the office. Not in some toxic hustle culture way, but because I was finally putting the brain I'd been sitting on to use. My manager, a sharp woman named Colette, noticed almost immediately. One afternoon she called me into her office and said, Harrison, whatever changed, keep doing it. The Whitfield account analysis you did last week was the best work anyone on this team has produced in 2 years. That felt good, not in an ego-driven way, more in an oh, right, I'm actually capable of things, kind of way. Around that same time, I started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Inman. Her office had a window that overlooked a parking lot, which she once described as a metaphor for how most people see therapy, not scenic, but functional. I liked her immediately. She helped me untangle something I'd been carrying around for decades without even realizing it. I'd spent my entire life measuring my worth by other people's recognition, Cole's approval, my parents' attention, my place in the family hierarchy. When those things disappeared, I realized I had no idea who I actually was because I'd never taken the time to figure that out for myself. It sounds simple when I put it that way. It wasn't. It took months of difficult conversations, uncomfortable realizations, and the occasional session where I'd walk out feeling like someone had rearranged all the furniture inside my mind without asking. But it was working. I could feel the change. Physically, I started running. Nothing extreme, just a few miles a few times each week. At first, I hated every single second of it. My lungs burned, my knees complained, and a particularly judgmental squirrel in the park near my apartment seemed personally offended by how slowly I was running. But I kept going. After a while it became the part of my day I looked forward to the most. Just me, the road, and the steady rhythm of my own breathing, reminding me that I was still alive and still capable of moving forward, both literally and otherwise. By the third month, I'd been promoted to senior analyst. By month 5, Colette recommended me for a team lead position on a major client engagement. It was a healthcare analytics project worth about $1.2 million, and they wanted me to lead the data strategy. Me, the guy who, just 3 months earlier, had been eating cold burritos alone in the dark. I also started dating. Nothing serious at first. Ara set me up with a friend of a friend named Waverly. She turned out to be completely wrong for me, but she was an excellent dinner companion. So instead of dating, we became friends. Then I met someone on my own. Her name was Thea. She was an urban planner, and we met in a coffee shop. When we both reached for the last blueberry muffin, she smiled and said, "I'll arm wrestle you for it." I let her have the muffin. She bought me a coffee to make up for it, and we ended up talking for 2 hours about city infrastructure. I know that sounds incredibly boring, but she somehow made it the most fascinating subject in the world. Thea was unlike anyone I'd dated before. She was direct without being harsh, piquant without being passive. She asked real questions, and she genuinely listened to the answers. On our third date, she said, "Tell me something about yourself that you usually keep hidden." So I told her the entire wedding story. Every bit of it. She didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with something closer to recognition, like she understood what it felt like to be the person in the room that nobody ever turned to look at. "That must have been incredibly lonely," she said. "Yeah," I replied. "It was." She reached across the table, rested her hand on mine and said, "You're not at table 14 anymore." I could have proposed to her right then, but I figured the third date was probably a little too soon. Besides, we hadn't even gotten our appetizers yet. 6 months after the wedding, I was a different person. Not completely unrecognizable. I was still Harrison, still quiet, still a little awkward, still unreasonably good at math, but I stood a little straighter. I took up more space. I was leading a major project. I was in a relationship with someone who truly saw me, actually saw me. And I had a therapist who was slowly dismantling every lie I'd spent my life believing about not being enough. Then, because life has a sense of timing that borders on theatrical, Cole called. I almost didn't answer. I was sitting on Thea's couch one Sunday afternoon, half watching a documentary about bridges that she was genuinely fascinated by, when my phone lit up with Cole's name. I hadn't spoken to him in 6 months. I hadn't answered a single text. The silence between us had grown from awkward to enormous. And I thought I'd made peace with it. Or at least I thought I had. Thea looked at my phone, then looked at me. "You don't have to answer that." "I know," I said, then I answered it anyway. Apparently, 6 months of therapy still isn't enough to completely override 32 years of being the brother who always shows up. "Harrison." Cole's voice sounded different, smaller somehow, less golden. "Hey, I know it's been a while," I said. "It has." There was a pause, the kind of pause where you can practically hear someone gathering the courage to say something they've rehearsed over and over. "I need to talk to you about something. Can we meet up?" Every instinct I'd built over the past 6 months told me to say no. I could hear Dr. Inman's voice in my head saying, "You don't owe anyone access to you just because they share your DNA." Ara's voice was there too, less clinical, more like, "If you go to that meeting without a backbone, I will personally come to your house and rearrange your bookshelf out of alphabetical order." For the record, that's the most terrifying threat anyone has ever made to me. But I said yes. Not because I was slipping back into old habits, because as I was curious. And because I wanted to see whether this new version of Harrison could sit across from his brother without shrinking. We met at a diner halfway between our apartments. One of those places with sticky menus and coffee that tastes like it was brewed during the previous administration. Cole was already there when I arrived. He was sitting in a booth by the window, and he looked rough. Not sick. Just worn down. Like the shine had faded. I slid into the booth across from him and waited. I didn't rush to fill the silence. That was new for me. The old Harrison would have immediately tried to make things comfortable. He would have asked questions, smoothed over the awkwardness. The new Harrison simply sat there and let the discomfort exist. "Thanks for coming," Cole said. I nodded. He took a deep breath. "So, a few things have happened." Prescott and I aren't friends anymore. He got fired from the firm about 2 months ago. It turns out he'd been inflating the numbers on client reports for about a year. When everything came out, it became a huge mess. The company almost lost a major account. And when they investigated, some of the work had Prescott's fingerprints all over it, but my name was attached because we'd been collaborating on the same projects. I raised an eyebrow. So you got in trouble too? Not officially, he said, but my reputation took a hit. My boss pulled me aside and basically told me I needed to be more careful about who I associate with. It was humiliating. I took a sip of the terrible coffee and said nothing. Cole continued. And things with Sutton have been, I don't know, complicated. We've been arguing a lot about money, about priorities. She wants to buy a house, and I want to wait. Every conversation about it turns into a fight. She keeps saying I don't take things seriously enough, that I coast through everything. I almost laughed at the irony, but I held it in. Sutton was using the exact same criticism of Cole that I'd quietly lived with my entire life. He coasted. He always had. And people like me had been the engine underneath him, doing the actual work while he smiled and collected the credit. And then there's Mom and Dad, he said. Mom told me you haven't come to a family dinner in 6 months. Dad's worried. They keep asking me what happened between us. And what do you tell them? He hesitated. I tell them I don't know. You don't know? I repeated. Harrison, come on. I know you're upset about the wedding stuff, but it was one day. It was just a role change. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. I slowly set my coffee cup down, deliberately. Then I looked my brother in the eyes in a way I don't think I ever had before. It wasn't one day, Cole. It was 32 years of one day. It was every time I got pushed aside so you could have the spotlight. Every time I was told not to make it a thing. Every time I showed up for you. Every single time. And you never even noticed. The wedding wasn't the problem. The wedding was just the moment I finally stopped pretending it didn't hurt. He just stared at me. I don't think anyone had ever spoken to him like that before. Certainly not me. I wrote you a speech, I said. My voice was steady. That surprised even me. I worked on it for 6 months. I called your college roommate. I dug through old photographs. I poured my whole heart into it. And you replaced me with a guy who told a story about a printer jam and compared marriage to a group project. Then you seated me at a table behind a pillar, with people who didn't even know my name. At your wedding, Cole. Your brother. At your wedding. The diner was quiet except for the sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen. Cole's eyes filled with tears. I didn't realize, he began. That's the problem, I said. You never realize 'cause you've never had to. We sat there in silence for a while. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't supposed to be. I wasn't there to make him feel better. I was there to tell the truth, maybe for the first time in my life, and let him sit with it. Eventually, Cole spoke. What do you want me to do? I thought about it, really thought about it. Not the automatic, it's fine, don't worry about it. That had been my default response since I was a kid. I want you to understand what you did, I said. Not just the wedding, all of it. I want you to stop treating me like I'm an accessory to your life. And I want you to tell Mom and Dad the truth about why I haven't been around. Not some vague I don't know. The truth. He swallowed hard. And if I do all that, then we'll see. I'm not making any promises, Cole. I spent my whole life making things easier for you. I'm done doing that. I put a $10 bill on the table to cover the coffee and stood up. He looked up at me. And for the first time, maybe ever, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't confidence, charm, or the effortless certainty of someone who'd always been the favorite. It was fear. The fear that he might have lost something he couldn't get back. I walked out of the diner and called Era from my car. How'd it go? She asked. I didn't shrink, I said. That's my guy, she replied. And I could hear the smile in her voice. That night, Thea and I sat out on her balcony. I told her everything. About the diner, about what I'd said. About what it felt like to finally stand up to the person I'd spent my entire life standing behind. How do you feel? She asked. And also, kind of amazing. She rested her head on my shoulder. That's usually how the important things feel. Over the next few weeks, I heard from my mom. She called twice. The first time, she left a voicemail that was mostly confusion. Cole told us some things, and your father and I are very upset. I don't understand why you couldn't have just talked to us. The second time I answered. We had a real conversation. It wasn't easy. She became defensive. She said I was being dramatic. She insisted Cole hadn't meant any harm. And I said, calmly and clearly, "Mom, I need you to hear what I'm saying instead of explaining it away." She went quiet, then she said, "When did you become so direct?" "When I had to," I replied. My dad called separately. He was quieter about it, the way he'd always been. But he said something that caught me off guard. "I think your mother and I could have done better by you, Harrison. I don't think we realized how much of the weight you were carrying." It wasn't a complete apology, but it was a beginning. And a beginning was more than I'd received in 3 decades. Meanwhile, things at work were going incredibly well. The healthcare project was a huge success. My team delivered the preliminary analysis ahead of schedule, and the client was thrilled. Colette pulled me aside one afternoon and told me there was discussion about creating a new director-level position. She said my name was at the top of the list. Everything I'd built over the past 6 months was standing on solid ground. And for the first time, so was I. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to tell me I mattered. I already knew. About 2 months after the conversation at the diner, my mom called and asked if I'd come over for a family dinner. Not a holiday, not a birthday. Just dinner. She told me Cole and Sutton would be there. She said she and Dad had been doing a lot of talking. Then she said, and I remember this word for word, "We want to try to do this differently." I talked it over with Thea and Dr. Inman separately. Thea said, "Go if you want to, not because you feel obligated." Dr. Inman said, "This is an opportunity to practice holding your boundaries in the environment where you first learned to abandon them." So I went. I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday evening, with Thea sitting beside me. When we pulled into the driveway, I stayed in the car for a moment, looking at the house where I'd grown up, the same brick facade. The same crooked mailbox my dad had been meaning to fix ever since I was in high school. The same front porch where I'd spent countless hours, reading books while Cole played outside with his friends. Inside, the table was set for 6. Mom had made pot roast, her go-to meal for occasions that felt important but didn't really have a name. Dad sat in his usual chair. Cole and Sutton were already there. Sutton hugged me. It lasted just a little too long, like she was trying to communicate something through the strength of the embrace alone. Cole stood when I walked in. The expression on his face was one I'd never seen before. Uncertainty. "Hey Harrison," he said. "Hey Cole." Thea introduced herself and immediately won my mom over by complimenting the pot roast before she'd even tasted it. That's the kind of effortless social talent I'll never have. But I deeply admire it. Dinner began awkwardly. It always does when there's an elephant in the room. And this elephant happened to be wearing a tuxedo made out of years of unresolved family dynamics. For a while, we stuck to safe topics: the weather, my dad's golf game, Sutton's job. Then my mom, who has never been accused of being subtle, set down her fork and said, "I think we should talk about what's been going on." I appreciated the directness, even if my stomach immediately tightened. Cole spoke first. He looked across the table at me. What came out wasn't polished, it wasn't rehearsed, it was hesitant, uncomfortable, and more genuine than anything I'd ever heard from him before. "Harrison, I owe you a real apology. Not just for the wedding, for all of it. I've been thinking about what you said at the diner. And you were right. I've spent my whole life taking you for granted. You were always there, always showing up, always making things easier for me. And I never stopped to think about what that cost you. I replaced you as best man because Prescott was new and exciting. I got caught up in the attention. And Sutton." He glanced over at her. "Sutton told me it would be fine. And I chose to believe that because it was easier than facing the guilt of what I was actually doing." Sutton shifted in her chair. "I want to own my part in that too," she said, looking directly at me. I pushed for the change. I thought Prescott's speech would be more polished, more entertaining. I was thinking about the wedding like it was a production instead of thinking about you as a person. As Cole's brother, that was wrong. And I'm sorry. I sat there taking it all in. Part of me wanted to immediately tell them it was okay, to smooth everything over, to become the easy Harrison everyone expected. But I didn't. I let their words settle. I let the silence remain. Finally, I said, "Thank you. Both of you. That means something to me." My mom cleared her throat. She looked at my dad. He gave her a small nod. "Harrison," she said. Her voice cracked. "Your father and I have been talking a lot since you and Cole had that conversation. And I need to admit something. We leaned on you to be the responsible one, the easy one. The one who didn't need attention. And we convinced ourselves that was simply your personality. But the truth is, We made that your role because it was convenient. It allowed us to focus on Cole because he was louder. And louder isn't the same thing as more important. I'm sorry, sweetheart. My dad, a man known for saying very little, added. You deserve better from us, son. I'm proud of the man you've become. And I should have told you that a long time ago. I'm not going to pretend I didn't get emotional. I did. Thea reached for my hand beneath the table and gave it a gentle squeeze. I held on like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. I appreciate all of this, I said once I trusted my voice again. I'm not going to pretend everything is fixed because one dinner can't undo 32 years, but this is a real beginning. And I want you all to know something. I didn't pull away because I stopped loving this family. I pulled away because loving this family was costing me too much, and nobody noticed. No one argued. No one tried to explain it away. No one told me not to make it a thing. They simply listened. After dinner, Cole and I ended up out on the front porch. Just the two of us. The evening air was cool. Crickets filled the silence. And the crooked mailbox was still just as crooked. I read the speech, Cole said quietly. I looked at him.
What?
I found it. You left a copy in the groomsmen's dressing room. The venue coordinator sent it to Sutton along with some leftover things. I read it about a month ago. It was incredible. Harrison, the raccoon story, the part about me being too scared to call mom and dad from that party, the line about how being a best man isn't just a title, it's a promise. I read it, and then I sat in my car and cried like a complete idiot for about 20 minutes. Well, I said, at least somebody cried over it. I was kind of hoping that would be the audience reaction. He laughed, a real laugh, not the polished, charming laugh he used around everyone else, the real one. The one that sounded just a little like a hiccup, the one I hadn't heard in years. I don't deserve to ask this, he said, but do you think maybe, someday, you'd read that speech to me? Not at an event or anything. Just, maybe, when you're ready. I thought about it. Someday, when I'm ready. He nodded. He didn't push. That was new. We went back inside and had dessert. It was the most ordinary, and at the same time, the most meaningful family gathering I'd ever been part of. Nothing had been completely repaired, but the cracks were finally visible, and visible cracks are the ones you can actually fix. 3 months later, Colette officially offered me the director position. I accepted. Thea took me out to celebrate. When she raised her glass, she smiled and said, "To Harrison, the main character." It made me laugh because Ara had sent me a card that very same week with those exact words written inside. I keep it on my desk at work where I see it every day. Cole and I aren't who we used to be. Maybe we never will be, but we've become something new. And something new is better than something fake. He calls me every couple of weeks now. Real phone calls, not performative ones. He asks about my work, about Thea, about my life, and he actually listens. He's going to therapy too. I didn't find out because he told me. I found out because my mom mentioned it with the same sense of amazement she'd have if she'd seen a dog driving a car. My parents are trying. My dad sends me articles about data analytics that he clearly doesn't understand, but somehow finds anyway because he wants to show an interest. My mom invited Thea to her book club. Afterward, Thea described it as beautiful chaos with wine. As for Prescott, I heard through the grapevine that he's selling insurance now. I don't wish him any harm. He wasn't the disease, he was the symptom. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel one small petty flicker of satisfaction when I heard the news. I still have the speech. It's sitting in the drawer of my desk at home. A little wrinkled, a little stained with coffee from the rehearsal dinner. I'll read it to Cole someday. Not because he earned it, because I wrote it with love. And I don't want that love to go to waste, even if the person it was meant for took a long time to deserve it. My name is Harrison. I'm 33 now. I'm a director at a consulting firm. I'm in love with a woman who challenged me to an arm wrestle over a blueberry muffin. And I have a therapist who compares the view from her office to the way people think about mental health care. For most of my life, I was the person nobody looked at. The reliable one, the quiet one, the one sitting at table 14. I'm not at table 14 anymore, and I never will be.